My husband told me, you don't have executive presence. 2 weeks later, his boss offered me a role above him. For years, Grant made me believe I was only useful in the background. Not useless. Not dumb. He never said it like that. That would have been too obvious. He said it gently, like he was helping me understand myself. You're great with details, Nora. You're better at shaping ideas than presenting them. You don't like pressure. I know you. And the worst part is, I believed him. I let those words settle inside me until they started sounding like my own thoughts. Grant would come home with his laptop, loosen his tie, drop into a chair, and start talking before he even asked how my day was. This client is impossible. My team doesn't understand strategy. Henry wants a cleaner plan by Monday. At first, I liked helping him. It felt like we were partners. He would talk through a problem, I would ask questions, and somehow the messy pile of complaints became a real plan. I rewrote his slides, cleaned up his talking points, moved numbers around so the story made sense, cut the arrogant lines, added the human ones. I told him when his pitch sounded defensive, when a client would feel blamed, when his team would get confused. Sometimes he listened. Sometimes he argued for 10 minutes and then used my exact suggestion anyway. The next day, he would come home glowing. They loved it. Henry said the deck was sharp. The client said I finally understood the problem. I would smile and say, that's great. And he would kiss my forehead like I was a lucky charm he kept on a shelf. See? This is why we work. I used to hold on to that. This is why we work. I thought he meant us. Now I think he meant me working for free while he got praised. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was not during a big fight. It was after dinner, while I was talking about applying for a higher role at my own company. Nothing wild. Just a role with more responsibility. I had already been doing most of the work, just without the title. Grant was scrolling on his phone while I talked. I remember the blue light on his face more than his expression. I said, I think I could do it. He looked up and smiled. Not proud. Not excited. Patient. That's a lot of politics, he said. You sure you want that? I said, I can handle politics. He gave a small laugh. Not cruel enough to start a fight, but sharp enough to stay with me. You hate when people push back. You take things personally. That kind of role eats people alive. I stopped talking after that. A few weeks later, I mentioned consulting. He said, consultants have to walk into rooms and own them. That's not really your style. Another time, I said I wanted to lead strategy one day. He said, you're brilliant, but you don't have executive presence. I remember standing by the sink when he said it, rinsing a plate I had already rinsed. My hands were wet. The room went quiet except for the water running. I asked, what does that mean? Grant shrugged like I was being too sensitive. It means you're smart. Obviously. But leadership is more than being smart. I turned off the faucet. And you think I don't have that? He came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders. I think you're amazing exactly where you are. At the time, I tried to hear love in that. But there is a certain kind of man who praises you exactly where you are because he is terrified of where you might go. The real crack happened on a Friday night. Grant came home angry. Not normal annoyed. Angry in that tight, twitchy way where he kept checking his phone and muttering under his breath. I was making tea when he dropped his laptop onto the kitchen table. They're going to lose the account, he said. What account? The big retail one. The one Henry keeps breathing down my neck about. I knew enough from months of listening to understand this was the client his team could not afford to lose. Grant sat down hard. They want a full recovery plan by Monday. Adoption is down. Their regional managers hate the reporting. Their executives think we oversold the platform. Everyone's panicking. I asked, what are they actually upset about? He looked at me like I had missed the obvious. I just told you. No, I said carefully. You told me the symptoms. What are they actually measuring? Grant stared at me, then gave that little dismissive smile. Babe, you don't need to get in the weeds. I hated that phrase. The weeds. As if I only understood tidy little flowers and not the roots of the whole problem. So I said nothing. I drank my tea. He complained for another hour. By 10:30, he was tired, frustrated, and out of ideas. Finally, he slid the laptop toward me. Fine, he said. You like puzzles. Tell me what I'm missing. I should have said no. But with his job under pressure and his pride cracking around the edges, I still thought helping him was what a wife did. So I opened the files. And I stayed there until almost 2 in the morning. The issue was obvious once I stopped listening to Grant's version of it. His team was bragging about activity. Logins. User counts. Training attendance. Number of check-ins. Clean little metrics that made them feel productive. But the client did not care about activity. They cared about whether the software was saving time in stores. Whether managers were making better inventory decisions. Whether fewer mistakes were happening in warehouses. Whether the money they spent was showing up somewhere real. Grant's team had been speaking to middle managers like that would fix an executive problem. They were sending more reports to people who already felt buried. They were promising more meetings to people who wanted fewer excuses. The client did not need more noise. They needed proof. So I built the plan around that. I cut the bloated language from Grant's draft. I wrote a cleaner opening. I made a simple 3-part framework: operational impact, executive visibility, and measurable recovery. I reorganized the slides so the client would see their own pain points before Grant's company started defending itself. I wrote talking points for the meeting. I wrote follow-up email language. I even wrote the line Grant later repeated like it came from his own soul. You don't need another vendor promising engagement. You need a partner proving impact. When I finally pushed the laptop back to him, my eyes burned. Grant skimmed it. Not carefully. Not with appreciation. He clicked through the deck, nodded once, and said, "That's actually pretty good." Pretty good. I laughed because I thought if I didn't laugh, I might cry. He looked up. What? Nothing. He shut the laptop and stood. I'll polish it in the morning. He did not polish it in the morning. He changed 3 words and used everything. On Monday, he presented it. On Tuesday, the client agreed to stay for another 6 months with revised benchmarks. On Wednesday, Grant came home with takeout and a bottle of wine, grinning like he had dragged the company out of a burning building with his bare hands. They loved it, he said, setting the bag on the counter. Henry said it was the clearest pivot anyone's brought him all year. I waited. I really did. I stood there, still in my work clothes, waiting for the tiny sentence that would have changed everything. Thank you. That was all I wanted. Instead, Grant wrapped his arms around me and said, "See? We make a good team." A team. Except one of us got praised in conference rooms. The other one cleaned sauce off the kitchen counter and pretended not to feel invisible. After that, he didn't just ask for help anymore. He expected it. He would say, "Can you clean this up?" Or, "Henry wants this tighter." Or, "I need your brain for 20 minutes. 20 minutes became 2 hours. 2 hours became midnight. And I kept doing it because by then, my fingerprints were all over his success. That made it harder to stop, not easier. If he failed, part of me felt like my work failed too. That is the trap nobody talks about. When someone takes credit for your ideas long enough, you start feeling responsible for protecting the lie. About a month after the client rescue, Grant's company planned a leadership dinner at a restaurant near downtown Richmond. It was supposed to be casual, but Grant treated it like a performance review with wine. He came into the bedroom while I was getting ready and looked me over. "Wear the navy dress," he said. I looked at him through the mirror. "What's wrong with this one?" "Nothing. The navy one is more polished." I almost argued. Then I saw his face. He was tense, already rehearsing the room in his head. So I changed. At dinner, Grant was in his element. Handshakes. Laughs. Inside jokes. His hand at the small of my back, guiding me from one group to another like I was part of the outfit. "This is my wife, Nora," he kept saying. "She's the organized one." People smiled politely. I smiled back. That was my role. Smile. Be warm. Don't take up too much space. Henry arrived later than everyone else. I had heard his name 1,000 times, usually attached to Grant complaining. Henry wanted cleaner numbers. Henry was too cautious. Henry didn't understand sales pressure. Henry expected miracles. But in person, Henry was calmer than I expected. Not flashy. Not loud. He had the kind of quiet confidence that made people stop performing. When he came to our table, Grant straightened. Henry shook my hand and said, "Nora, I've heard a lot about you." I said, "Nice to finally meet you." Grant leaned back like he owned the moment. Henry looked between us and said, "That recovery framework last month. The language around operational impact was interesting." Grant smiled. "Yeah, that was a big one." Henry nodded, but he was watching me. Then he said, "Did Grant run that by you?" My stomach tightened. It was such a simple question. Not accusing. Not dramatic. But Grant's hand froze around his glass. For a second, I almost protected him again. I almost said, "A little." I almost made myself smaller out of habit. Instead, I said, "We talked through it at home." Grant jumped in fast. "She's being modest. I use her as a sounding board sometimes." A sounding board. That phrase hit me harder than I expected. A sounding board only reflects someone else's voice. It does not create anything. Henry glanced at Grant, then back at me. "What did you think the actual issue was?" he asked. The table noise around us seemed to fade. I said, "They weren't asking for more engagement. They were asking for proof." The reports showed activity, but their executives cared about operational savings. It looked like the team was trying to solve an executive trust problem with middle manager check-ins. Henry did not blink. Then he asked, "And the store-level impact model?" I answered before I could overthink it. It needed to be simple enough for executives to repeat. 3 indicators, not 12. If they couldn't explain the value in one sentence, they weren't going to renew. Grant laughed lightly. "She gets very into this stuff." Nobody laughed with him. Henry asked another question. Then another. And suddenly I was not Grant's wife standing beside him in the navy dress he picked. I was answering. I was thinking out loud. I was explaining the logic behind the plan I had built in my own kitchen while Grant watched me like I had stepped out of a box he thought he had locked. I did not try to embarrass him. I did not raise my voice. I did not say, actually, I wrote the whole thing. I did not roll my eyes or correct every little thing he tried to add. I just answered the questions. That was enough. Because within 5 minutes, Henry was speaking to me, not through me. Grant tried to jump in twice. Both times, Henry listened politely, then turned back to me. By the time dessert came, my hands were shaking under the table. Not from fear exactly. From recognition. Being listened to after years of being softened and redirected and talked over can feel almost violent. Like the air changes too fast and your body doesn't know what to do with it. On the drive home, Grant said nothing. At first, I thought maybe he was processing. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he would apologize. Then we pulled into our driveway. He turned off the car. Still nothing. I opened my door, but before I stepped out, he said, "You enjoyed that." I looked at him. What? He stared through the windshield. You enjoyed making me look stupid. The words landed cold. I answered questions. You hijacked the conversation. No, Henry asked me about the work. My work. I sat there with one foot outside the car, feeling something in me finally stop bending. Grant, I wrote most of that plan. His jaw tightened. You helped. I built the framework. You helped your husband. That is not the same as being the strategist. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. That line you used in the meeting? The one Henry praised? I wrote it at 1:30 in the morning while you were asleep on the couch. He turned toward me. His face was not guilty. It was angry. That's what marriage is, Nora. Partners help each other. Partners don't erase each other. For a second, he looked like he wanted to say something cruel enough that we would never come back from it. Instead, he got out of the car and slammed the door. Inside the house, the silence felt heavier than yelling. Grant dropped his keys on the counter. You embarrass me in front of my boss. I stood near the doorway, still holding my purse. You embarrassed yourself by pretending I was just your sounding board. His eyes narrowed. Careful. That one word did something to me. Careful. Like I was an employee. Like I was a child. Like the truth was dangerous only because it belonged to me. I said no. I have been careful for years. Careful with your ego. Careful with your career. Careful not to make you feel small while you made me invisible. He shook his head. You're jealous. Of what? My position. My relationships. My world. My world. I remember that phrase more clearly than anything else from that night. Because he said it like I had wandered into a room where I did not belong. Like every idea I gave him only counted after it passed through his mouth. I said, your world seems to need a lot of my work. He stared at me, then walked to the guest room and shut the door. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Henry's questions. Grant's face. The way the room shifted when someone finally treated me like I knew what I was talking about. And then I thought about something that scared me more than the fight. Maybe Grant had known all along. Maybe he knew I was capable. Maybe that was why he worked so hard to convince me I wasn't. The next morning, Grant acted like nothing happened. He came into the kitchen, poured coffee, and said, "We need to not make last night a thing." I looked at him. It was already a thing. He sighed. Nora, I'm serious. You don't understand how this looks at my company. How does it look? It looks like my wife is trying to insert herself into my work. You brought your work into our home for years. That's different. Because it helped you? Because you're my wife. I waited for him to hear himself. He didn't. Instead, he said, just don't make it weird if Henry reaches out. That made me pause. Why would Henry reach out? Grant looked away a little too fast. I don't know. He seemed impressed. I'm just saying, don't let it go to your head. There it was again. The ceiling. The soft warning. The careful little reminder that admiration was dangerous if it belonged to me. A few days later, while I was at work, an email came in. Subject line, Customer Strategy Conversation. From Henry. I stared at it so long my screen dimmed. The email was short. He said he appreciated my perspective at dinner. His company was reviewing the way their client teams handled retention and executive reporting. He wanted to know if I would be open to a short-term consulting conversation. Then came the sentence that made my throat tighten. I realize this may be delicate because of Grant, but I also do not want to ignore the contribution you clearly made. Contribution. Not support. Not sounding board. Contribution. For years, I had been starving for one honest word. And there it was, sitting in my inbox from a man who had known me for one dinner. I did not reply right away. I accepted nothing. I forwarded nothing. I just sat there, heart pounding, wondering why being seen felt so much like betrayal. That night, I waited until after dinner. We were in the kitchen again, because of course we were. That room had become the witness to everything I had swallowed. I said, Henry emailed me. Grant's fork stopped. What did he say? He asked if I'd be open to consulting on a short-term strategy review. Grant did not speak at first. Then he leaned back slowly. No. Just no. Not, that's complicated. Not, how do you feel about it? Not, can we talk through boundaries? Just no. I said, you don't get to say no for me. His face hardened. Nora, this is my company. It would be consulting. Short term. It would humiliate me. That was the truth, finally. Not that it was inappropriate. Not that it was risky. It would humiliate him. I said, why? Because people will think I can't do my job without my wife. I looked at him. Can you? He flinched like I had slapped him. I regretted it as soon as I said it. Not because it was false, but because it was sharp. Because there was still a part of me that did not want to hurt him, even while he was trying to shrink my life back down to fit inside his pride. Grant stood up. You're letting one dinner make you delusional. I'm not delusional. You don't know that world. I know the work. He laughed under his breath. You know pieces of it. Because of me. My chest tightened. Because of you? Yes. Because I brought it home. Because I let you see it. Because I included you. Included me. Like I should be grateful he allowed me to do unpaid labor in my own kitchen. Then he said the sentence that changed the shape of my marriage. You would never have gotten that email if I hadn't let you into my world. I did not cry. Something colder than sadness moved through me. I looked at the man I had loved, the man whose panic I had carried, whose words I had sharpened, whose reputation I had helped build, and I realized he did not see me as a partner. He saw me as a resource that had started asking for a name. I said, I'm going to reply to him. Grant's eyes went flat. If you do this, you're choosing your ego over your marriage. For years, he had made my ambition sound like vanity. My hurt sound like sensitivity. My intelligence sound like assistance. And now my chance to be recognized was an ego problem. I said, no. I'm choosing not to disappear. Grant stared at me like he did not recognize me. Honestly, I barely recognized myself. But for the first time in years, that did not scare me. It relieved me. I did not accept Henry's offer that night. I want to say I was bold and confident, that I clicked reply right in front of Grant and chose myself without shaking. But that is not what happened. I took my laptop upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed. I opened the email. Then I closed it. Then I opened it again. My hands were trembling. Not because I thought I was unqualified. I was scared because accepting meant admitting how much of my marriage had been built around staying smaller than I was. Grant slept in the guest room again. At 2 a.m, I replied to Henry. I kept it professional. I said I appreciated him reaching out. I said I was open to a conversation. I said I understood the situation was delicate and wanted clear boundaries from the beginning. I did not mention Grant's reaction. I did not mention the fight. I did not mention that my marriage felt like a glass sitting too close to the edge of a counter. Henry replied the next morning and suggested a video call with him and another director named Allison. That was it. No drama. No secret meeting. No shady deal. Just a normal professional conversation that somehow felt like I had stepped across a line Grant had drawn around me years ago. When I told him the call was scheduled, he stared at me from across the kitchen. You actually replied? Yes. He nodded slowly. Then don't expect me to be okay with the consequences. What consequences? He picked up his coffee. You'll see. It was not a threat exactly. It was worse because it sounded calm. Like he had already decided I deserved whatever came next. The call happened on a Tuesday morning. I wore a plain black blouse and sat in the small corner of our bedroom where the light looked decent. I remember checking the background 3 times because I didn't want a laundry basket showing. It felt ridiculous, being nervous about laundry when the bigger problem was that my husband was downstairs pretending not to listen. Henry was on the call with Allison, who was direct, sharp, and not interested in small talk. Henry said, we're not asking you to critique Grant personally. We're asking you to look at the process. That mattered to me. I said, good. Because I'm not interested in turning my marriage into a business case. Allison nodded. Fair. Then let's talk process. For the next hour, they walked me through the same issues Grant had been ranting about for months. Clients leaving after strong sales cycles. Reporting nobody trusted. Managers promising features the product team had not finished. Customer success finding out too late that a client was already unhappy. I listened. I asked questions. Who owns the handoff after the sale? What does the client think success looks like before they sign? Who updates the executives when the first milestone slips? What happens when sales promises something the product cannot support? After that last one, Allison leaned forward. That happens more than it should. Henry looked tired. Yes, it does. By the end of the call, they asked if I could put together a proposal for a 4-week review. Limited scope. Clear deliverables. No involvement in Grant's employment decisions. No private access to his performance records. I appreciated that. Even angry, even hurt, I did not want to destroy him. I just wanted my work to stop passing through him before it became valuable. When I came downstairs, Grant was sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in his hand. He didn't ask how it went. He said, feel powerful now? I was still holding my notebook against my chest. It was a work call. With my boss. With Henry and Allison. He gave a short laugh. Oh, Allison too. Great. So now finance is involved. Grant, their reviewing process. Don't talk to me like I'm stupid. I'm not. You think I don't know what this is? I set my notebook on the counter. What is it? He stood. It's you making yourself useful to people who already wanted a reason to question me. That sentence told me more than he meant it to. I said, were they already questioning you? His face changed for half a second. Then he recovered. My department is under pressure. Everyone knows that. And you didn't tell me? You were too busy enjoying being discovered. There was no point after that. Every conversation became a circle with the same ending. I was selfish. I was embarrassing him. I was overestimating myself. I was letting strangers flatter me. I was risking our marriage over a temporary ego boost. I signed the consulting agreement anyway. The first week was uncomfortable. Not because of the work. The work made sense. The uncomfortable part was walking into Grant's company as myself. Not his wife. Not his helper. Not the woman who stood beside him at dinners and smiled when he called me organized. I had a visitor badge with my own name on it. I had a small conference room booked for interviews. People came in and answered my questions. Some were guarded. Some were relieved. Some looked at me like they were trying to figure out how much I already knew. Ryan was one of the first people who spoke honestly. Grant had complained about him before. Ryan was apparently too negative and always blocking deals. In person, he was quiet, careful, and obviously exhausted. He sat across from me and said, "Can I be blunt? Please." He glanced at the closed door. Sales keeps promising custom reporting timelines we can't meet. Then when we push back, we're told we're not being team players. By the time customer success gets involved, the client thinks we lied. I asked, how long has that been happening? Ryan gave a tired little smile. Long enough that everyone has a folder. A folder. Screenshots. Emails. Call notes. Not to get anyone in trouble. Just to protect ourselves. I wrote that down. He watched me. Then he said, for what it's worth, a lot of us knew that recovery plan wasn't fully Grant. My pen stopped. I looked up. Ryan seemed almost embarrassed. Not because he's not smart. He is. But it didn't sound like him. It sounded more grounded. Grounded. That word almost hurt. I had spent years being called the person who grounded Grant, but somehow nobody thought the ground deserved a name. I said, I'm not here to discuss my marriage. I know, Ryan said. I just thought you should know you're not imagining things. I held myself together until I got to my car. Then I cried in the parking lot with my badge still clipped to my blouse. It wasn't loud crying. It was worse. Quiet, angry tears from a place I had been ignoring for too long. Because when you are being slowly erased, you start doubting your own outline. You start wondering if maybe you only helped a little. Maybe you're exaggerating. Maybe partnership means not keeping score. Then one person says, no, I saw it too, and the whole structure cracks. I called Paige. She answered on the second ring. Are you okay? I said, I think I'm finally angry. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, good. That made me laugh through tears. She said, I'm serious. You've been sad for years. Angry might actually move you. Paige had been my friend since before Grant. She was the one person who never liked the way he praised me. She used to say, he compliments you like a manager giving feedback. I always defended him. Now I sat in my car outside his office and whispered, I think he knew. Paige asked, knew what? That I could do more. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, of course he knew. That's why he kept telling you not to. The second week went faster. I interviewed customer success, product, finance, sales support, and 2 former account managers who had left the company. I reviewed client feedback. I compared promises in sales decks to product timelines. I mapped where communication broke down. I did not write Grant's name into the report like a weapon. I did not need to. The pattern was bigger than one person, but Grant had benefited from it. He had pushed aggressive promises, ignored internal warnings, and relied on charm when clients wanted accountability. By the end of the 3rd week, I presented early findings to Henry and Allison. I was nervous walking into that room, aware that Grant was somewhere in the building, aware that every sentence I spoke might come home later as another accusation. But once I started, the nerve settled. That surprised me. I had spent so long believing I could not lead a room that I didn't recognize what leading actually felt like. It did not feel like domination. It did not feel like being the loudest. It felt like clarity. It felt like saying, here is the problem, and watching people stop pretending they couldn't see it. I showed them the broken handoff points, the inflated promises, the reporting gaps, the missing executive summaries. The way customer success was being forced to repair trust after sales had already spent it. Allison asked hard questions. I answered what I knew and admitted what I didn't. Henry took notes the whole time. At the end, he said, this is strong work. I waited for the old reflex. The part of me that wanted to say, it's nothing, or I just organized what was already there. Instead, I said, thank you. 2 words. They felt heavier than they should have. That night, Grant came home late. I was in the living room, pretending to read, when he walked in. His face had that pale, tight look again. So, he said, you're enjoying this. I closed the book. I'm doing my job. No, you're building a case. I'm reviewing process. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You keep saying that like it makes you innocent. I'm not trying to be innocent. I'm trying to be accurate. Grant tossed his keys into the bowl by the door. You know people are talking, right? About what? About you. About us. About how my wife came into my company and suddenly thinks she's an expert. That used to scare me. People talking. Being judged. Being called ambitious like it was an insult. But I was tired. So I said, are they talking about that, or are they talking about what the review is finding? His mouth tightened. You've changed. No, I said. I think I stopped translating myself into something easier for you. He stared at me. Then he said, quietly, I miss who you were. That hurt. Because I knew what he meant. He missed the version of me who stayed up until 2 in the morning building his ideas and accepted a forehead kiss as payment. He missed the version who let him call her supportive when he meant useful. He missed the version who confused being loved with being needed. I said, I miss who I thought you were. He slept in the guest room again. After that, we were not really married in any meaningful way. We still lived in the same house. We still passed each other in the hallway. We still texted about groceries and bills and whether the dishwasher was making a weird noise. But the marriage itself felt like a room we had both left and were too tired to clean out. At the end of the 4 weeks, I delivered the full review. It was not dramatic. No public takedown. No slide that said Grant ruined everything. Real life is not that clean. The report recommended a restructuring of the client revenue process. It suggested separating new sales promises from renewal strategy. It created a required product approval step before custom reporting could be offered. It moved executive communication into a shared process instead of leaving it to whoever was loudest in the room. Some people hated it. That usually meant it was honest. Grant came home early the day after the report went to leadership. I knew something had happened before he spoke. He looked older somehow. Not physically, exactly. Just deflated. He stood in the kitchen doorway and said, they're restructuring. I kept my hands still on the counter. What does that mean? My role is being eliminated. The room went quiet. Even after everything, my first feeling was not victory. It was shock. Then sadness. Then a guilty ache in my chest, because I had spent years helping him survive rooms he maybe should have learned to stand in by himself. I said, Grant. He held up a hand. Don't. I stopped. He looked at me with wet, furious eyes. They're folding my team into a new strategy group. Henry said the company needs less relationship management and more accountable revenue process. I did not know what to say. Then he gave a bitter little smile. And guess who they want involved? My stomach dropped. What? They offered you a longer contract. I stared at him. He nodded. Congratulations, Nora. You got what you wanted. The words should have made me feel powerful. They didn't. They made me tired. I didn't want you to lose your job. You wanted to be seen. Yes, I said. I did. That was the first fully honest thing I had said all day. Grant looked at me like honesty was cruelty. Wanting to be seen is not the same as wanting you destroyed, I said. He leaned against the doorway. Does it matter? Same result. No, it matters. He looked around the kitchen, and for a second I wondered if he was remembering it too. All the nights. All the open laptops. All the times I gave him the language that made him look thoughtful, the structure that made him look strategic, the questions that made him look prepared. Maybe he was. Maybe that was why his voice got quieter. You could have said no. To the contract? To all of it. I shook my head. I said no to myself for years. Grant's face twisted. That is so dramatic. And, just like that, the grief hardened. Because even then, with everything exposed, he still needed to make me smaller than the truth. Henry called me the next morning. He said the company wanted to extend my consulting contract for 3 more months to help implement the changes. He said after that, if the structure worked, there might be a permanent strategy role. He also said, I want to be clear. This is not Grant's old job. We are not asking you to replace your husband. I appreciated that he said it. Because people would say it anyway. I told him I needed a day to think. Then I called Paige. She listened while I talked in circles. What if accepting made me cruel? What if Grant was right? What if people thought I had used my marriage to get inside the company? What if I was becoming exactly as selfish as he said? Paige let me spiral for a while. Then she said, Nora, did you lie? No. Did you sabotage him? No. Did you create the problems they found? No. Did you do good work? I didn't answer right away. She said, Nora. Yes. Then stop acting like being chosen is something dirty. I cried after that. Not because she was harsh. Because she was right. I accepted the contract. Grant moved out 2 weeks later. He packed quickly, like speed could turn leaving into control. He took his clothes, his laptop, his golf clubs, and the espresso machine he swore I never used even though I used it every weekend. Diana called me the night after he left. I almost didn't answer. When I did, she did not say hello. She said, "I hope the job keeps you warm at night." I closed my eyes. "I'm not doing this, Diana. You humiliated my son. Your son humiliated himself. He loved you." I looked around the quiet living room. The couch still had the dent where Grant used to sit with his laptop open, waiting for me to make him sound better than he was. I said, maybe. But he loved me most when I was useful. Diana scoffed. "You chose ambition over your marriage." "No," I said. "I chose not to be unpaid labor in my own life." She hung up. For a while, the story Grant told people was simple. I betrayed him. I inserted myself into his company. I used his connections. I chose a title over a husband. Some people believed him. They liked that version because it was easy. Ambitious wife takes down hardworking husband. Clean. Familiar. No need to ask what happened behind closed doors. A few mutual friends pulled away. One sent me a long message about how marriage required sacrifice. I almost replied with a list of every sacrifice I had already made. Instead, I deleted it. I was done writing reports for people committed to misunderstanding the data. But not everyone believed him. Ryan emailed me once after he heard Grant had left the company. It was short. "I know this has probably been ugly. For what it's worth, the review needed to happen. A lot of people are breathing easier." I saved that email. Not to use against anyone. Just to remind myself that truth existed outside Grant's version of me. The first month after he left was strange. The house was quiet, but not peaceful yet. I kept expecting him to walk in angry. I kept hearing phantom sounds. His keys in the bowl. His shoes by the door. His voice saying, "Can you look at this real quick?" I found myself making dinner for two and putting the extra away untouched. I found one of his old notebooks in the drawer near the kitchen table. It had meeting notes from years ago, but half the pages were my handwriting. Whole sections. Frameworks. Phrases. Questions. I sat on the floor with that notebook in my lap and felt grief move through me like weather. Because it was not all fake. That is the hard part. There were nights when helping him felt intimate. There were moments when we laughed over bad slides and cold takeout. There were mornings when he made coffee and kissed my shoulder, and I believed we were building one life together. I had to grieve that too. Not just the betrayal. The sweetness that made the betrayal harder to leave. The consulting contract became permanent 4 months later. The title was Senior Strategy Consultant. Not some unbelievable overnight promotion. Not a fairy tale. Just a real role with real authority, real expectations, and my own name attached to my own work. On my first official day, Henry stopped by my office. It still felt weird to say that. My office. Small. Glass wall. One plant page bought me because she said I needed something alive in there besides anxiety. Henry knocked on the open door and said, "You ready?" I said, "Probably not." He smiled. "Good. The overconfident ones are usually a problem." That made me laugh. Later that morning, in my first meeting as part of the team, Allison asked, "Nora, can you walk us through the rollout risks?" For half a second, I froze. Inside, I was back at that kitchen table. Back at the sink. Back hearing Grant say I did not have executive presence. Then I looked around the room. People were waiting. Not impatient. Not dismissive. Waiting because they expected me to know. So I opened my notes and started speaking. No performance. No pretending. Just the work. After the meeting, I went into my office, closed the door, and cried. I know that sounds dramatic. Maybe it was. But those tears were not weakness. They were release. Every swallowed sentence leaving my body. Every time I softened an idea so Grant could carry it. Every time I laughed off a comment that cut me. Every time I mistook being needed for being valued. A few months later, Grant and I met at a coffee shop to discuss the separation paperwork. He looked tired, but stable. He had found another job, not at the same level, but steady. I was glad. I never wanted him ruined. We sat across from each other with paper cups between us like strangers pretending not to know each other's worst habits. He said, "Do you ever regret it?" "The job." He looked down. "All of it." I thought about lying. I could have said no. I could have made myself sound stronger than I was. Instead, I said, "I regret that it had to happen this way." He nodded slowly. "But you don't regret choosing it?" "No." His jaw moved like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Then he said, "I really did think I was helping you." That almost broke my heart again. Because maybe part of him did. Maybe he had convinced himself that keeping me small was protection. Maybe he thought the world would be kinder to me behind him. Maybe he needed to believe that because the alternative was admitting he had used my fear to feed his confidence. I said, "I think you liked me best when I made you feel bigger." He looked at me then. For once, he did not argue. That was the closest thing to an apology I ever got. We signed the paperwork weeks later. Not with screaming. Not with one final dramatic scene. Just signatures, tired eyes, and two people who had spent too long calling imbalance love. The life update is simple. I still live in Richmond. I kept the townhouse for now, though I moved the kitchen table to the other side of the room. That probably sounds small, but I needed the space to stop feeling like his office. I bought a new table too. Round. No head seat. Paige said that was painfully symbolic, and she was right, but I don't care. Grant and I are not friends, but we are civil. He stopped telling people I stole his career, at least as far as I know. Maybe because it stopped getting him sympathy. Maybe because part of him finally understood I had not taken anything from him that was truly his. Diana still thinks I destroyed the marriage. That is fine. Some people need a villain so they don't have to examine the person they raised. As for work, it is not a fairy tale. Some days are hard. Some rooms are still full of egos. Some people still listen better when the same idea comes from a man 10 minutes later. But now, when that happens, I do not disappear. I say, yes, that was the point I raised earlier, and then I keep talking. The first time I did that, my voice shook. The second time, it shook less. The third time, it didn't. That is my calm victory. Not that Grant lost his role. Not that Henry noticed me. Not even that I got the job. My victory is that I no longer need someone else to repeat my words before I believe they matter. Sometimes I still miss who I thought Grant was. I miss the easy version of us that probably only existed because I was not asking for enough. I miss the nights when I thought we were partners. I miss being able to love him without seeing the quiet bargain underneath it. But I do not miss shrinking. I do not miss proofreading my own personality before speaking. I do not miss being called supportive by a man who meant silent. And sometimes, when I sit at my new kitchen table with my laptop open and my own work in front of me, I think about that night he told me I did not have executive presence. He was right about one thing. I did not have his version of it. I did not dominate rooms. I did not charm people into ignoring problems. I did not speak louder when I was afraid. I listened. I noticed. I named the thing everyone else was avoiding. And when I finally stopped hiding behind him, people listened. So I guess that is where I am now. Separated. Working. Healing. Still angry some days. Still sad on others. But no longer invisible. And I keep wondering, because people still have strong opinions about it. Did I betray my husband by accepting work from his company after they cut his role? Or did I just finally stop letting him build a career out of making me disappear?